Hi, it's Mark, back with another Photoshop tutorial, and today we're going to be running through all of the adjustment layers in Photoshop. What are the adjustment layers in Photoshop? These are the adjustment layers in Photoshop. So whether it's obvious things like brightness and contrast, or a bit more obscure such as threshold, I'll try and find an example for each one. There isn't time to do each one in detail, but where I do have a detailed video on them, I will link to that video above as and when we get to it. We've got a whole raft of pictures to get through, and these are there. Use your own or download these by all means. I've got them all bundled on my website waiting for you to download. It's quite a hefty file, over 100 megs, so I've also included individual files should you just want to cherry pick as we go along. So if that's what you want to do and play along at the same time, press pause, go and grab them, and I'll meet you on the other side of the titles. So our first adjustment layer is solid colour. So let me hide that for the moment. And let's just throw a solid colour on there. There you are. Why is it black? Because black was our foreground colour. Of course, you get a colour picker with it, so you can actually go and choose a colour of your taste and apply it. Still not highly useful, you might argue. Well, let's change the blend mode, shall we, to colour. Now, I sometimes use this technique to convert a picture to monochrome rather than black and white. So you get all the various luminosity values to match the underlying picture, but you've got a single colour cast over it. Of course, you might not want it entirely across the whole picture, and in this particular example I wanted to tint the glass in the sage. So I'd come to my adjustment layer, Command I or Control I to mask it all out, B for my brush tool, D for default colours. I've got white as my foreground colour there, and I would just simply come in and I would now put that tint in. You don't have to be too specific with something like this where you just tint in glass, because it's very forgiving. The picture itself hides the mistakes, really. Of course, you can select something and be far more precise about it. But as I went out the lines there, but this isn't about whether or not I'm staying within colouring within the lines or not. This is about showing you what you can do with the adjustment layer. And then, of course, you can dial back the opacity to suit before and after we've added a tone. The other way of doing this, of course, would have been to be on the stage in the first place, to make a selection. So let's W for our select tool, and it's my quick selection tool, and let's just select the top of the sage. So we're doing an inverse of the one before. I'm not worried about whether or not that's an entirely precise selection, because this isn't about selecting things. But there you go, we've got some sort of selection on the stage now, and now we could go for our solid colour adjustment layer. And the adjustment layer will pick up on the selection you've already had and will make a mask accordingly. Let's choose a different colour, let's make it a bit pinky, shall we? There you go. And again, let's drop it down to colour, and we'll just put a tiniest pink tinge into the top. That's irrelevant. The point being, you can pre-select or post mask in order to adjust it, and that's the same with a lot of the other pictures. So our next picture is this one, which I titled British Summertime. I don't know what it'll end up being called, probably be called Picture 02 in the download, but I'll get to that. Okay, and what was our second adjustment we wanted to go for? That was gradient. So let's add a gradient on here. Again, just stick it on, see what happens. Alright, so this, last time I used gradient, it looked like going from black to no fill, linear, 90 degrees, i.e. vertical, and you can see that it's actually applied that black on the way up. Okay, now let's reverse that, bring it down the other way, and that got that coming down. How might that be useful? Well, let's change the colour, shall we? So while you're in gradient, you've got lots of presets, all sorts of colour ranges and things you can use, including some legacy gradients. Now, whenever we look through adjustment layers and I come to the legacy versions of them, whether it's doing gradients or patterns, then if you don't see them, then I'll just cancel this. If we go to Window, and in this case we want gradients, which brings up our gradient tab here, and then up here you've got legacy gradients. So when we come to do patterns I'll call it out now. We go there, we choose legacy patterns to bring in your legacy patterns. Okay, let's put that gradient back on. And we inverted it, didn't we? So it's minus 90. And then we actually wanted to change that by clicking on it. Now we could go and pick one of these legacy gradients, but I will call out in there, you've got some nice color harmonies in there. I've got a video all about color theory. Doesn't get too far into theory, but just ends up playing and learning lots of tips about using color. I'll link to that now above. So let's just pull out one of the photographic toning ones, and I'm going to go for something like that one. Got no idea what it was going to be like. Click OK. Close that and just pop it into color overlay. And there you've got our gradient. So it's light at the top, coming down to orange at the bottom. There's lots to do. We can play with it. We can change the opacity on it as well. But again, it changes the look and feel. And of course, you can go in multiple times to these, including picking your own colors. So you click there, you've got a color swatch. You could change that black to something a bit darker red, and you could come in this end, and you could change that more to possibly to a yellow. And I don't like these colours, I'm just demonstrating what you can do to change. And there you are, you've got more of a two-tone coming in. That would have more promise if they were complementary colours, an example of which would be blue going into a yellow. But there you are, we haven't got time to dwell on most of them. Let's have a look at what our third one is now. It's going to be pattern. So you might have to go and get the legacy patterns put in fact you will, and into Lightroom. And this is the one we're going to use for that. So let's edit that in Photoshop. Edit original. Conscious I'm going through these quite quick, but the beauty of this being a YouTube video is there's a pause button and there's a rewind button, and you can actually go through them again. And of course there will be some specific call outs to more detailed tutorials. So Command 0 or Control 0 on a PC to make this a little bit bigger. And the pattern I want to, well, let's just throw a pattern on first, shall we? Just see what it does. So obviously this pattern is not very good. Artist surfaces, that's what we want. You can see I had it open previously. It's under legacy, and now you know how to get legacy. So let's do artists there, and change the blend mode to soft light in this case. And let's zoom in a bit more. And it has the effect of making this look like a bit of a canvas. And again, you can play with the opacities. You cannot play with the scale. Scale just blows it up, as you'd imagine. Let's go 150, type that in, and it looks a bit bigger. Again, you don't have to have it across the whole thing. This makes it look like a canvas print. But what you might want to do is use the fact that you've got the pattern here to add texture. So if I go on the mask, Control or Command I to hide it, B for my brush tool, D for default colours. I've got white, put a softer brush. I want full opacity and flow, and we shall just brush in here to bring some of that texture into the wall. And that way it doesn't look like a canvas anymore, but it does apply a bit more interest in to the picture. So before and after, particularly strong down here, and I think that helps put a lot more grain on the wall. So there you are, we've used pattern to actually make things look like a canvas, and we've also used pattern to actually add some grain to the picture. What do we have next? We have got brightness and contrast. Bit of an obvious one, but let's go and grab our next picture. So I was quite pleased when I caught this picture because the Mini, as it drove through the shadow, the lights popped on, which was rather good, which made it stand out a lot more. So we'll double up on this one because I'm conscious we're probably already about 9-10 minutes in and there's a lot to go. This is going to be a long video, but I'll put section markers below so you can actually just link to the specific adjustment layers you may be more interested in than others. So let's bring simple brightness and contrast on here, and all I'll say of brightness contrast is there's an auto button. I'm in the habit of, whenever you see an auto button, clicking it just to see what it does, because somebody's got the effort of setting particular algorithms and values in there. in this particular case, wasn't that enamoured by it. But what I would do with brightness contrast in this particular picture is I know exactly what I want to do. I just basically want to put that in where this is, really, to tell you the truth. I want to just darken that particular area. So I'm using my selection tool up here. So I'm using the polygon lasso tool. So now I've got my selection in there. Then I would choose my brightness and contrast. It's just an alternate way of doing it. And then I'll bring the contrast up within that. And so before and after. So very targeted and deliberate. Let's add levels. So throw a levels adjustment layer on here. So with levels, you can actually move the output levels here, which raises the black point. So there's less and less black in there, or rather the reference of what was black is lifted. And similarly with whites, I rarely use that. I mostly use these 3 points. So moving from here introduces more blacks, and moving from here, more whites. However, what you can do with levels is the individual color channels, and this is common to a couple of the other layers. But when you're on red, you've actually got red and cyan. So if we move from the lights, you introduce your reds. If you move from your darks, you introduce cyan. When you're in green, you move from your right, you get more greens in, and move from your left, you get magentas in. And when you're in blue, you move from the right, you get blues, and you move from the left, you get yellows. So this could be a quick way of doing some colour casting of those 6 particular colours: yellow, blue, cyan, red, magenta and green. However, I'm leaving levels there because there's nothing you can do in levels that you can't do in curves, and curves is far more powerful, far more adaptive. Having said that, yes, I do use levels. I throw it on because I sometimes like the idea of just getting it very quick and going into one particular slider and just make my adjustments. What do we have next? Next, we've got this picture here. It's edited in Photoshop. And the next particular layer is Speak of the Devil Curves. Because there's so much you can do with curves, and because it's a long video anyway, I'm going to do a little bit of a cop-out and just show you something that people don't often use in curves. And instead I will link above to a more comprehensive video all about curves, and I would suggest you have a look at that because there's an awful lot you can do in curves. And the feature I'm going to point out is this auto again. So if I hold down my Option key on a Mac or an Alt key on a PC while I click on auto, I get a new dialog box. And the default here for me is to enhance brightness and contrast. So this provides the traditional, what we would think was an S-curve, adjusting the contrast of the image, albeit I think on this image it hasn't brought in many darks. That's probably because it was such a dark image anyway. Then we've got things such as enhance monochromatic contrast. It tends to preserve more of the whites, more of the lighter tones. It doesn't brighten it too much. The next one, enhancing per channel contrast. Apart from doing contrast, it looks at each channel separately, red, green and blue, and makes the adjustments. I rather like that one. It's a bit more like almost a very dark tealy type has come in on this particular one. And find dark and light colours. That analyses the picture and finds the darkest and light colour, and it uses them in the curve to adjust the shadows. Now in this particular picture there isn't a massive difference. You can see some of these lines slightly moving. There isn't a massive difference because of just how the picture is, but it's worth playing with those. And of course you've got snap neutral mid-tones at the bottom there. So that actually takes colours that are close to neutral and just nudges them down into that. So it makes the mid-tone and neutral a little bit more broad, is how I understand the interpretation of that one. So there you go. That's something that's not often used in curves, but it's worth knowing about. What's next? Next is this picture here. And on this one, after curves, we've got exposure. So exposure is quite an obvious one. I think we all know that you can lower the exposure and it darkens the overall highlights, midtones and shadows, and you can raise the exposure. However, it's worth playing with the offset and gamma too. So the offset is shadows and midtones and doesn't touch highlights. So I rather like that sometimes. It puts a nice rich dark look out, the glasses come out there, but it hasn't altered the highlights. And gamma correction just adjusts the midtones themselves. So it's exposure for midtones, for want of a better description, both up and down. But as I say, I actually like offset, and I like to bring that down a bit. Very, very dramatic, especially on a sunset type picture. And that's all we have to say on that one. Moving on, we've got this picture here. So let's edit that in Adobe Photoshop, edit original. And what we're going to be looking at here is Vibrance. So with Vibrance, there's a Vibrance slider and a saturation slider. Well, they both do similar things. They increase and decrease the intensity of colours, but there is a difference. Saturation increases the intensity of all colours at the same time, but Vibrance works on the more muted colours and protects skin tones. So Vibrance in a way is kind of a smart saturation. And well, let's just play with the sliders. This is quite a quick one, this one really. So Vibrance goes up and down. Not so much of a difference there on the up because of the nature of the picture, whereas saturation, so much more. So there you go. So really that is just more saturation, less saturation. And this one is more subtle. I'm trying to be smart about it. Notice how these don't come flying out. So as an introduction, as all of these adjustment layers are, a little bit of time on each as an introduction, I think that's all I'll say on Vibrance, and we'll move on to our next picture. And our next picture happens to be this one of the Tyne Tunnel. Where are we? Edit in Adobe. So this one's going to be edited in Adobe Photoshop, no less. Here we go. And hue and saturation. So Command plus or Control plus to get this a bit bigger. Apart from the obvious in saturation, where you can take saturation out, you can put saturation in, and the fact you can apply various hues or what the main base colour is going to be mixed in, and the brilliance of it. Let's click reset. One of the handy things I find on saturation is, without having to understand most of that, this is your friend. The hand tool there with a left and right arrow. So if I wanted to make that blue more intense, I can click the eyedropper on that blue. I can move it to the right to increase the saturation on the blue. I can move it to the left to take the saturation out of the blue, or wherever I want in the middle. But on the same, and also this is for another video to get into the minutiae of detail here, but also on the same adjustment, I click on the wall here. Now when I did that, that word there changed from blues to greens. If you watch, I'm back on here, it's on blues. Click on here, it's now into a green channel. I can actually increase the greens. Now I'm doing this deliberately over the top just to demonstrate the fact that I don't need this. I'm using my eye. I'm coming in here and I'm selecting various colours. It's jumped over to yellows now, and I'm increasing or decreasing the colours based on that. Let's do a bit of red in the sock, and then make his socks really stand out. So you can, with the hand tool, go in and selectively change things. And of course you can always mask. So that's one of the things I would call out with hue and saturation, other than the obvious, without doing a whole video on it. And to be honest, there could be a whole video on it. So let's move along and look at our next particular picture, which is this one. And when this one loads, we go and pick our next adjustment layer, which is color balance. Command plus or Control plus to get it a bit bigger. Earlier on, when we were looking at curves, when we were looking at gradients, we mentioned color opposites, complementary colors, and the fact that some tools actually swap between yellow and blue are opposites, and cyans and reds, and magentas and greens. Well, what you find here is exactly that. You can see how you've got red and cyan, magenta and green, yellow and blue. But the advantage here is that it automatically divides it for you between shadows, midtones and highlights, which is quite useful. So let's, for example, put in our shadows, let's bring some blues into our shadows on this picture. And you can see how that's introduced a darker blue and nicely taken that into the shadows. But then we can come to the highlights and put in some yellows. And they kind of complement each other in the overall effect. Let's reset that and do another one. So let's say we want to go into shadows and bring some reds into shadows, just a little bit. And then into the highlights, you want to bring in some cyan. And you can balance the colours between these, hence it being called colour balance. But the thing is, picking the appropriate channel, shadows, midtones and highlights, makes all the difference. And the rest is eye candy. It's up to how you see it on screen when you do that. Except I would say that it's good to counterbalance when you're doing this between highlights and shadows as the more appropriate way of doing this in my book. But then if that's a rule, throw it out, because rules are only there to be broken. What's our next one? That was Armstrong Bridge at Jesmond Dean, by the way, in Newcastle. So let's edit this one. And our next adjustment there is black and white. What to say about black and white that makes an introduction to it a little bit different from the norm? Well, clearly, if I switch it off, clearly you've got colours here. Blues. Let's just pick blues. And we switch it on. So the blue slider will influence how much the black and white effect appears on the blues. And that's quite good. But while you're in black and white, as soon as you've switched it on, can you remember what the colours were? You can come here and switch it off and on. Oh yes, that was a bit of a beige there, wasn't it? So let's switch it back in and go and adjust that. But where's beige on here? So the two things I'll introduce you to are, one, the hand tool again is our friend. So I don't know what colour that is. But if I click on it, I can now drag to the right. I can see my yellow slider going up and coming down. But I'm targeting, by looking at this picture, I don't care what the colour is at all. In the sky, was it cloudy, was it grey, was that blue? I don't care, I want to do something with the sky. It happens to be blue, I can see the blue slider moving as I do this, but I'm not looking at that anymore. I'm actually looking at on screen. Now I think I can make a better judgment by doing that and looking at the picture and forgetting this. And yes, it works and it doesn't work in some, so let's pick another colour. What's inside that building? I don't know, but do I want it lighter? Yeah, I think I do want inside that building lighter. Or do I want it darker? And you just play around. That was magenta, by the way. So that's the one thing I'd say. I rarely use these, and I usually do that. Occasionally, I'll switch it off and on to have a look. But the other thing, let's just reset this. The other thing about black and white that not many people actually do is, well, let's not go into the fact there's some defaults you could go with, and let's see what they do. What's infrared do? You know what? I like that. Let's reset it. Is to use tint. Early on, when we did our first colour fill, if you remember that on the Sage, we went into solid colour. I said, introduced a monochromatic one. Well, here's the other way of doing it. You can click in the tint, and then you can go for, I think on the Sage we used something around like something in the blues about there, like that, something like that. But there you are, you've actually got that, and then within that you can adjust how they impact things. And you know what, I didn't know what I was going to do with this picture till I put it on. That's how I wanted to run with this one, but I like the results on there. And that is black and white without even necessarily looking at these, using the tint, using the finger pointer. Alright, what is our next picture? Our next picture is the high level bridge with a very high definition reflection. So let's edit this. Why do I keep coming down here every time? I know where edit is. Let's choose it. And after black and white, we have photo filter. Photo filter is one of those adjustment layers that you could do countless videos on, and you know what? They'd all be not very useful. And I say that because every single picture is different, and every single adjustment you make in a photo filter is different. I guess you could argue the same is true of all adjustment layers, but these are a set of filters that you can actually go through, and they will impact your picture in different ways depending on which ones you actually pick. However, when you do pick one, it comes with an associated colour. So if we went back to warming filter, which was the default one came in, it's applying a bit of this colour. If I click on colour, the picture does not change. It's applied that colour at 25%. This is where you can say, well, you know what, I want more of that and more again. But it starts to break up some of the luminosity. You can preserve luminosity with this. And in doing that, you can get away with some different effects. We're heading towards monochromatic again, in a way. So that's photo filter. It really isn't much to say other than have a play with the presets. And when you're in them and you kind of like something, but it's too strong, drop the colour, because it will not change the filter until you then change the slider. So it's pointless me showing you this particular picture unless you really want it and want to keep editing it all the time. Be my guest, it's in the bundle, but it's one of those things where there isn't a substitute for going through and having a look. The only thing I would say is the likes of photo filter, when you get into compositions, I've got a video on compositing, and one of the things you do on compositing is to apply a global effect at the end to knit all the layers together to have a common look and feel. I'll link to that video above now. Go and have a look at that. But that's where photo filter for me comes in. It's a bringing it together. It's a common look and feel across the picture to bring composites and the likes together. But don't forget, when you've chosen one, you drop down to colour. It shouldn't change it until you then decide, well, I liked it, but I want less of it. I liked it, I want more of it. And isn't that a lovely colour to leave on the high level bridge? Let's go and get out of jail with the next one. Where are we? Here we go. This is a trawler going out to sea with North Shields Fish Quay in the distance. So let's edit that one. There we go, got rid of that garish green. And our next one after photo filter was channel mixer. What could this be about? It kind of looks familiar. I committed to doing all of the adjustment layers, but this one's a little bit more complicated. So there's two ways to look at it, one of which we're not going to, and the other way we are. So I took the liberty here of adding in a red, green and blue panel. Let's just hide this for the moment. With our adjustment layer on, as it started off, default red, if I take the reds up, fully saturated, bring them down, they disappear quite quickly. I'm still on the red output, but I'm targeting green pixels. If I take them to the right, they become yellow. To the left, makes no difference. I'm still on the red channel. If I take the blue to the right, I get that. Bring it to the left, I get nothing. Let's jump over to the greens. No surprising, if I bring the greens down, it does the same thing, goes to black, goes to the right, it's fully saturated anyway. If I target the reds, bring them to the left, no difference, tip to the right, I get yellow. So depending, and we'll do the same for blue, so left, nothing, right, I get a lighter blue, a cyan. So depending on the channel you're on, you have the actual slider for that colour, and the other two will have a varying effect on the colours present in the picture based on how much there is in the picture and how much you adjust these sliders. Let's just reset that for a second. And while I'm on red, you've got this constant slider as well. So that shifts between all three. Now, in truth, I rarely use this adjustment layer, but I have used it. And how I've used it is how I'd encourage everyone to be, and that is inquisitively. One of the ways I have used this filter is to choose some of the black and white options that come with it to experiment. I kind of like that one, actually, to tell you the truth. I kind of like it even more like that. So do I use this? Rarely. Would I look at a picture and say, I know exactly what this needs, channel mixer? No. But do you know what? It's there. Play with it. Do you have to play with it as the rule book says? No, of course you don't. So that's my way of using it. The other way, which is far more technical and understanding how reds, greens and blues appear in each other channels and popping over here to the channels and actually seeing those effects and what you can then do with them with masking and such, can be done. It's out with the remit of this. But I think if you didn't know what it was called, if it was just called cabbage, and you applied the cabbage filter and had some unknown sliders to move around, I think that is quite a good black and white rendition, and possibly different from the black and what we could have got with the black and white slider, or from just a little bit playing. So stay inquisitive, guys, and let's go on to the next one, which is Spirit of the Tyne ferry from North Shields to South Shields and back and forth. And the adjustment layer is colour lookup. There's no more I can say about colour lookup that I didn't already say for photo filter. So before, when we chose photo filter, I said that really there's too many options to go through. It'll vary from picture to picture to picture, and really some of the strong benefits are in applying an overall look and feel to bring together lots of layers, particularly in compositing, to knit everything together. And that's the same here with colour lookup. But essentially, you go in and you've got lookup tables. You can buy lots of lookup tables. You get free lookup tables online, but also you can go with what they have. I do tend to favour a couple of them. I do tend to use fall colours, but I always roll the opacity back. I also tend to use crisp and warm, and again I would possibly play with the opacity, but also bring down to an overlay or a soft light. So you've got before and after. But the advantage here is, let's assume you've got lots of layers here, which have got all the various composite parts of a picture. Perhaps you've done a sky replacement and you want to get a knitting together of them, so the sky falls into the same sort of colour gamut and ranges and feel and look and luminance as the ferry does. Then applying something common on top will help. So there's not much value in me actually going through all of these. Safe to say that if you put this on normal, dodgy amber or edgy amber, I call it dodgy amber, is rather bizarre. But even then, let's drop it into a colour, or I don't know, a soft light. It has its place. So these are just to suit, and which one works and which one doesn't is totally dependent on what your picture looks like, what colours are already in it. But this, for me, is a tool for knitting layers together when I'm compositing. So that was considering there's an awful lot in there. That was a quick walk in the woods. What's next? The hub down on the Newcastle quayside. Great coffee, great cake. And this was just after it reopened after second lockdown. And I thought, that's great. It is a bike hub, by the way. Lots of cyclists go there. And there's no through fare there. Well, there wouldn't be, because you'd actually end up in the Tyne. And there's a bike and there's the cafe open. I thought it was quite a symbolic image. And what are we adding to this one? We are looking at Invert. Oh, well, this is going to be a very quick one, isn't it? There you go. What to say about Invert? Well, you can see what it does. If this was a black and white picture, let's quickly make it a black and white picture, because we know how to do that now, don't we? so black and white, and the stick invert on. There's your traditional negative. Okay, let's delete that. So what to say about invert? Not a lot really. It's horses for courses, and I don't know many courses to make it work. I have seen it used as an abstract by masking that out, and then with B for brush tool, D for default colors, and using a brush to actually deliberately bring an invert in to a particular part of an image. Like so. And I know I'm not taking any precautions here. I am just scribbling with my brush without any selection to protect me. It's not even a hard brush to give me a nice neat edge, but you get my drift. I've seen it as abstract, but essentially, do I use it? Never. Do I invert things all the time? I invert things all the time. When I put a layer mask on, I will alternate, and you've seen me do it so far in this video. I'll alternate between Control I or Command I to make it a black mask or a white mask. So if you've got a really good idea of how to use this, a really good effect, share it with me. Put it in the comments, please, because I would really be interested to know. What do we have next? A little composite I did for a bit of a joke after watching Stephen King's It. I couldn't resist doing a posterised version of Central Station Metro in Newcastle with poor old George there, Georgie, walking down the tunnel with its rather oversized balloon. And what effect are we doing on this one? We're going to posterize. And not really a great deal to do with this either. You've got the level of posterization. But you can, on some, get some banding. I don't know if that'll come out on YouTube, but there's some banding coming in there depending on the number of levels that you do. But essentially, to the right, it's hardly any posterization. But if you want to go real old school and get down to just a few colours, then go to the left. It can be really dramatic. And again, horses for courses on the particular picture. I like my original picture, but you know what? I think I like that one too. So there you go. We're flying through them now actually, so Lightroom. And all of these are in the bundle. If you haven't already got them and you're just watching along and you know I've whet your appetite, please go and get them. Just click on them. You don't have to sign up for anything at all. And while I'm on that, if you like what we're doing here and you want to be notified of future videos, please click on that subscribe button too. And the bell to be notified of future releases. Job's a good one. Right, so what am I doing down in export? That's because I stopped to talk to you. And that's always a bad thing, letting me talk to you. Let's edit in Photoshop. Okay, I organised a photo walk actually one day, and we were going to North Shields. And I got down to the metro station. This is South Gosforth metro station. And the services were suspended. So that wasn't good. Rapid phone calls around and reorganised it. We all met up there anyway, but I took this particular one because I wanted that to be used in the aftermath of the photo walk. And what filter are we looking to do here? What adjustment layer we're going to do here? Threshold. What the dickens is going on with threshold? Now, despite what that looks like, I use thresholds a lot. And I use thresholds a lot in compositing. So when I'm bringing in a couple from one picture, put them into a forest scene from another picture, put something else in there, there's certain rules you've got to adhere to get it to look authentic. You've got to match the lighting, you've got to match the shadows, you've got to match the depth of field, you've got to match the luminosity, and you've got to match the brightness values, the lights and the darks. And threshold is a great tool for helping in some of that. And that's covered off in the video I've already linked to. However, in the spirit of going through each and every one of these adjustment layers now and finding something of value in there, let's just stick with it as it is, and let's play with this midpoint. You'll notice on threshold, there's no grayscale, there's no colour, it's purely black and white. If I come here, it's black. If I come here, it's white. And somewhere in the midpoint there, you might find a version of your picture you actually quite like. I will leave it at that for now. Please check out my previous videos to find how you can use this as a really useful tool in compositing. But for now, it's one of the adjustment layers. I wanted to check it off. That's what I've got for you for threshold. Back into Lightroom. 2 to go, I think. Yeah. Export again. Edit in Adobe Photoshop. And that's my good lady holding a crystal ball down by the key side. And that's a time bridge in the background. And what are we going to do with this one? We're looking at a gradient map. So why is a gradient map different from where we started with gradient? Well, let's have a look, shall we? Let's double click on it. It doesn't seem to be doing anything. That's because it's used a slightly different way. You have to click here. But when I do click here, this looks familiar from the very start of the video, some 40 odd minutes ago. And yes, apologies, this is a long video, but all the individual parts are listed out. You can jump back and forward. We've got legacy gradients. We've got color harmonies in there. We've got the photographic toning, which we actually used earlier. Now, so a gradient fill has a direction. It's either radial, so from the center of the circle outwards, or inverted, or a diamond shape, or top to bottom, or bottom to top. So it alternates between those two colors regardless of what's on the picture. But a gradient map works on luminosity. So here, our current gradient that we have here is from that color there, which is 100% black, to this color here, which looks to be 100% white. And we could change that. So let's say we wanted the lights to be more of a yellow. So we just bring a slight yellow in there. Click OK. And let's say we wanted the darks to be some sort of darker blue. To bring that in there. Like that. I'm not advocating that as a good mix. I'm using it as a demonstration. So this has nothing to do with top to bottom, centered out. It's purely luminance values. And you needn't stop with that. You can actually put another color in at the midpoint. So you click beneath it, double click to get your color picker back up, and let's do something silly and put a pinkish one in the middle. So now we've got a gradient from what are pure blacks through to pure whites and the mid-tones, but we've defined them as being a blue, a pink and a yellow. But this is an ideal space to then go and play with some of the colours that you have in your library to see what they do. And some of them are absolutely awful, but some of them aren't. And the ones you like, make a note of them, you might come back to them. But the advantage is they all play against the background as soon as you actually click on them. Okay, so there's also similar theme things, so blues, that's not such a good one, I guess. Reds, I'm clicking on these things I've never clicked on before. I've never really gone into these, but you might like them. But that's by the by. The thing is here, how to use it. This particular adjustment layer is based on luminosity values from darks to lights, as opposed to placement on screen top to bottom. And that is fundamentally the difference. I think we've almost run out of time. We've certainly run out of pictures. So this is the Civic Centre out of focus. Behind some steps, walking up from where the Carriage Pub is in Jesmond in Newcastle. And our final adjustment layer, hurrah, drum roll, fanfare, is selective colour. So although this might look familiar, it's not RGB, it's CYMK, or cyan, yellow, magenta, and K for black, which is another colour profile, usually used in printing as opposed to what you see on screen. I've got a video on colour theory, which doesn't spend too much time on colour theory. I called it out earlier on, linked to it early on in this video, and it explains the difference between some of those. But essentially, what this does is it allows you to take out the elements of other colours within the primary without affecting any of the primary colours. So we've clearly got yellow in this picture. So I've got yellow here. If I now change the yellow itself, then that's a given. It's going to take the yellow out, or it's going to add it in. But there's also other colours in there. Or is there any magenta in there? Apparently so. So I'm taking out the influence of magenta within this colour, yellow, or adding a little bit in to change it. So purely in the yellow channel, I am now impacting the other pigments, for want of a better description, within that. So let's pick another colour we know we've got in. We've got some sort of blue up there. So let's pick blues, and let's see if the any yellow influence in there. Not that I can really see. What about magenta? So magenta, as you can see, we're taking that out now, but we're not impacting that yellow anymore. If you notice, we've dealt with that. We're impacting that. So it's a way of actually going in, thinking more about printing here, thinking more about the sort of CYMK type colour schemes, or forget all that, visually, just what you want to see on the screen. And to that end, you know what? I kind of like the little tweak we've done there. I prefer this yellow to have come out that particular colour. It's in the list. We had to include it. It's not massively useful in my book, but you might find that it is for you. So as an introduction to all of our adjustment layers, I hope you found that useful. And even if you knew or were very familiar with some of them on those ones, I hope I found a little bit of a different slight on that for you to get some use out of that too. Until next time, and I'm now going for a beer. I really want a beer. Until next time, I'll say bye-bye. Bye-bye.